We're all part of Hollywood, all of us, whether we work in it, whether we work for it, whether we watch it, whether our kids watch it. We are all part of this industry, just like we're all part of climate change. We all contribute to it, we're all affected by it. So this is why this conversation is so important. Now, I've worked in the climate movement for longer than a good proportion of the people in this room have been alive. You all look very, very young. So I've been going back about 30 years. And over those years, the climate community, the folks who do the maths and the folks who work on the science and the folks who work on the architecture, haven't been that closely aligned with or looking at the storytelling industries, the entertainment industry. You know, there's been a bit that, you know, there's been a few shows, we all remember Day After Tomorrow, like there's been a little bit of interest, but there's been a bit too much distance. So much so that I sometimes think of Hollywood as the industry that climate change forgot. Because as an industry, we've done a great deal of work on what I call our footprint, and perhaps not enough on what I call our brain print, in terms of how we touch hearts and minds, how we tell the stories of change, how we uplift the characters and the solutions, the controversies, the story, the narrative arcs, which are the story of our age. And so I'm so excited to have an amazing panel with me today to talk just about that. And as on cue, Tagada, the most film-worthy part, get your Instagram posts in now. The most film-worthy part of Solutions has come by. And for those of you who are online, I promise at some point we will pick Tagada up so you can all see her. Because we're getting a lot of comments on going, screw the panel, show us the dog. So, you know, nobody in this room who works in comms is going to have a question about that. So it's my great pleasure to invite up on here. I'm going to sit here because this is the precarious one. And if anyone falls off stage, it should be me. I'm going to ask Heather Phipps, co-founder of the Hollywood Climate Summit, to come up and join me. Come on down. Come on down, Heather. I'm going to ask Adam Umhofer, the foundation executive at CAA Foundation, to come and join me. I'm going to ask Emma Stewart, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Netflix, to come and join me. And Mark Chambers, the Director of Earth Alliance, to come and join me. Woo-hoo! Now, despite this being our venue, I haven't quite thought through how to sit in this skirt on a high stool, but let's see if that works. Okay, all right. Well, if I fall off, it will make a good post. So what we're going to do is I've got some questions, and I'm also going to be giving some of the answers because this is an area that I work in. We're going to come to folks in the audience, and also for those of you online, I know we've got a big online audience right now. I will be taking questions from the online. I'm going to do fair, one in the room, one online, one in the room, one online. But first of all, I'd like to kind of go down, and as you introduce yourself, I'd just like to ask you, why did you want to come here today and have a conversation about Hollywood and climate? So I'm going to start with Heather.
Well, thank you, Solly. Hi. First of all, so honored to share the stage with people whose careers and thought leadership I have respected for so long. So thank you for the invitation. That was a huge part of why I was excited to join. But my name is Heather Phipps. I am a co-founder of the Hollywood Climate Summit and the program director at the Redford Center. And I am excited to speak about Hollywood's role in the climate economy today because I see the tremendous influence that Hollywood has in a cross-sector way. And I see the deep roles that many people at all skill sets can have in Hollywood, from editing to writing to content creation to innovation and design. I think there's just so many brains, and especially creative minds, who can contribute to the imagination of what is possible for the climate crisis.
Awesome, fantastic opener. Thank you so much, Heather. Adam, follow that. Tell us about
right.
CAA.
Also, thank you for having us. So pleased to be on this panel with this great group of people. I work at the CAA Foundation, which sits within Creative Artists Agency. It's a leading talent agency. We represent artists, entertainers, athletes, media folks, and the CAA Foundation is tasked with helping those people use their platform and their reach to advance the social good and to use the resources and networks of CAA as a talent agency to move issues forward. I have been working on climate since I arrived there about 4 years ago. I'm here because I will do anything Solly asks me to do. But really excited about how we can use our position within the entertainment ecosystem to move the issue forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Adam. And to Emma.
I'm here because I like using both sides of my brain. The left brain is the one that I trained up for 20 years. I bring charts and graphs. I have extensive annotated bibliographies. And I feel comfortable among scientists, though I was never a practicing scientist. I was trained that way. But on the weekends, I'm a performing artist, write poetry. My children are now following in those footsteps. And so I love the fact that in my day job, from one half hour to the next, I am using first the right brain to explain our decarbonization targets. Excuse me, the left brain to explain our decarbonization targets. And then the other hemisphere to support creators who increasingly want to reflect our changing world on screen authentically and accurately.
Awesome, thank you. And Mark?
I need to figure out how to get my children to follow in my footsteps. So I'm here for a lot of reasons. I've spent the lion's share of my career working in policy and politics, and it's not enough. There is a need right now for us to be able to drive more forces in service of climate action, and it requires us to be much more intentional about reaching out in places where we haven't been before. And so I am committed to doing that. I'm also committed to the fact that when you have someone that's able to create such gravity around them personally, like Solly is, they have an orbit. And that orbit teaches us a lot about how people actually communicate and engage. They are drawn to things that make them feel good about themselves. And that's like a really key piece of why culture is a missing component and something that we should spend a lot of time focusing on.
Awesome. You say a word about Earth Alliance, just so folks
Sure.
in the room who might...
So Earth Alliance, we are a new organization that is a philanthropic studio dedicated solely to one purpose, which is to create an unprecedented alliance of cultural power in service of climate. So we are actively working with everyone here to try to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much. So just reflecting, Emma, on what you said there about the left brain and the right brain. And if the left brain is the logic, the right brain is the magic. And actually there is a fucking lot of logic in climate change. Sorry, please beat me. But we need more magic. We actually need the bit that's hard to categorize, that's hard to put in a chart, that's hard to put in a bibliography. The hearts, the minds, the art, the magic, the creation, the humanity that storytelling brings. I would be really interesting to know, I might be the only person in the world who has a postgraduate degree in sustainability science and in Shakespeare. I was a very, very boring young woman. And those two sides, the power of sustainability, the power of climate, the power of the science, and then the power of storytelling is something which is very at the heart of Futerra. And one of the things which I'm immensely proud of is to sit on the advisory board of the Hollywood Climate Summit. And I'd love to hear from you sort of a bit of the story about where did the Hollywood Climate Summit come from? And also, by the way, for anyone who doesn't work in comms, the words Hollywood Climate Summit are like the 3 sexiest words. Like, you guys did it really, really well. Climate Summit, Hollywood Climate Summit, you got it. So tell us a little bit about where HCS came from.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're so thrilled to have you on our advisory board, Solly. And you too, Adam. So the Hollywood Climate Summit, I am a co-founder, but it is a collective group of people who have put together the Hollywood Climate Summit. And really, we've all come from different skill sets and positions within the entertainment industry, but we all observed the same thing, that this industry was by and large not talking about climate. We're not seeing it in our stories. It's a sore and still taboo subject to broach on nearly any set, in nearly any editing room, and nearly any writing room. And so because of that, we really wanted to create a space where in our own professional language, we could come together to learn and really, really level up the conversation of climate justice in Hollywood. And so for us, that looks like organizing the community. There's a lot of great work happening in this space. This is a space where people can come and learn about it. They can come and engage with it. They can make mistakes. It's in our creative way of looking at things. And then our key is that we have to make it, and I'm so glad you used the word sexy, we are bringing a culture of excitement to this, because it does feel like sometimes you're going to get schooled on climate change if you're trying to learn about it. We're trying to make it really exciting, really accessible. We're hearing from our favorite creators. We are connecting and collaborating with one another in very engaging workshops together. And so, this is a space where people are coming together from whatever their skill set is. It's accessible depending on any entry level that you're coming to. And we're getting really, really excited about the potential that storytelling, that the entertainment community, and the cross-sector spaces in tech, fashion, music, and social media can all have if we're all collectively engaging in what climate action could look like as an industry.
Brilliant. And Heather, just personally, thank you so much for doing this, because it's one of those things that when it happens, you go, why has this not been in existence for the last 20 years? Like, why has this space not made? And you and your team have made that happen. So thank you. Adam, you and I have had this conversation a number of times, and I can't count over the last 20 years how many times people have come to me and said, if we could just get every celebrity to talk about this, if we could just do a whole series of PSAs where all the famous people talk about climate change. And we know that that isn't really authentic in terms of how to tell the story. So where is talent at the moment on this? Like, what is going to be that unlock for people to be able to have this conversation?
Yeah, well, of course, people in entertainment have been interested in this subject and cared deeply about this subject for decades. One of our claims to fame is Al Gore, some 20-something years ago, gave his famous slideshow presentation in the CAA office, and there happened to be a group of producers and documentarians in the audience who said, you know what, this really should be a movie, and An Inconvenient Truth was born, which served as an inspiration to so many of us and a wake-up call to the world, and many other different ways Hollywood is engaged in the issue to varying degrees of success over the years. But I think where we are today within the industry is not all that dissimilar to where the society at large is that people are aware of this problem and would love to do something about it, but just do not know what to do. How can I, as an individual, have an impact on this gigantic problem? And so what we're finding is whether it's talent or executives or people working crew on a set, every conversation we have on this subject, people are ready and willing to engage. They just need the answers. And so the work that people here and others we know are doing to create those answers, to create those pathways, are really exciting, because we're giving people action items. We're giving people the solutions, and it's not just a win for the climate. It's a win for individual people. It's a boost for you when you find, oh, through the course of my job, I can make a few changes to how I do this work, and it's going to have a positive effect on the climate crisis. Oh, great! I feel good about this, and so. Whether it's climate storytelling or sustainable production, we're finding that nearly everyone we work with, without exception, is super excited to engage here.
Brilliant. It reminds me of something which we said in an earlier panel, which is climate change is now communicating itself, and it's got a bigger budget than Hollywood. It is out there, the weather, the wildfires, the extreme heat, like this is now in people's faces. What folks now need to know is, well, what do we do about it? Stop telling me to be afraid and start telling me what to do. Like, actually, what are the actions that we need? And that's interesting that that's coming from talent as well. Now, Emma, in the years you've been at Netflix, and I'm sure this is entirely down to you, the slate of content around climate has gone exponentially up. It's like, I watch my curated Netflix and I can't keep up. What is it that's driving that? Because for years, people have been knocking on the door saying, please make more climate content. And we've been getting a lot of editorial independence. Oh, our audiences don't want it. Oh, we don't want to do a PSA. Oh, we don't want to be boring educationalists. But it seems like you guys are cracking through this. What is it that's moving the dial for creatives?
I'm glad that's your observation. We started with the research. So everything in my team is grounded in the science, whether it's the atmospheric science or the behavioral science. And so we asked our consumers. And they, like talent, don't know what to do about this subject, but it's very salient for them personally and quite emotional. And they reward brands who act on it. And so they were clear, as were public opinion polls in all of our key markets, that if our content is to be beloved and to continue to please audiences of every stripe, it needs to represent a societal transition that we all are experiencing and have the unique pleasure, I guess, of living in a decade that is so consequential for our species. And so we established internally an internal service that creators can take advantage of at their discretion, which provides them with fact-checking support as well as creative consultations. And so they come to us. But they are, I would say, if I can paint them as a monolith, generally intimidated by the subject matter, don't want to get it wrong because there is so much snark out there, including in our own climate community, not helpful, which is why everyone has to confess their climate sins as they start talking about this work, because no one is perfect. We live in a fossil fuel economy. So once they come to us, they really start to see the value of that, and we've had a number of them come back multiple times for multiple different shows. And then what's interesting is that often that will manifest in work with members of talent, or it will improve our work to decarbonize our productions. So there's a really nice virtuous circle that's forming where the part of my team that is supporting on productions will say, the woman who's the lead in Queen Charlotte, Golda, she's been plant-based for 20 years and she talks about it all the time on set. We might just invite her to do a little piece on it. Not only did she do a little piece on it, she did it in royal gowns on set and said she was the first plant-based person in 1,000 years. I mean, she really came through in her character. And then we had Madeline Klein from Outer Banks, which is a hugely popular show, especially with younger generations, speak deeply from the heart, volunteered to do this, talking about how climate change is affecting the Outer Banks, which is the show she stars in. Similarly, with Don't Look Up, we had DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence and others volunteer to talk about why this is important to them. So I think the PSA needs to be replaced with personal service announcement, which is, why does it matter to you?
And just to connect the two answers, anecdotally, we've heard young actors who have started their career at a place like Netflix and see the work they're doing on this subject and then go do work somewhere else where there isn't as much attention being paid to the topic, and they're like, wait, what? I actually want to continue working for Netflix. So it is actually important to the talent in terms of who's employing them.
Love that business case, but that's what we need more of. Mark, you and I have had this conversation a number of times. Culture, and I'm very aware that I'm sitting in the US and the word culture and culture wars has a whole other meaning, but socio-cultural change, as the IPCC would call it. So last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is all of the world, all the scientists from every country in the world, including countries which are currently at war with each other, come together every 6 years and agree the climate science. You are definitely going to have to beep this bit. Project number 1 is how fucked is it? Project number 2 is what fucked it? Project number 3 is how do we unfuck it? And that third report, which is technically called Working Group 3 of AR6, Chapter 5, included sociocultural change in it for the first time. For the first time, the scientists said culture matters in climate. And in fact, sociocultural change could save 5% of demand-side carbon quite quickly. Now, 5% of demand-side carbon might not sound like very much to you and me, but to a scientist, it is a huge amount of carbon. That is a world-saving, life-saving amount of carbon, that sociocultural change. So the scientists are telling us that culture matters, but that is, culture is, it's not like concrete. It's complex and it's multiple and it's different around the world and it's different in different communities. So in the work that you've been doing, how important is culture, and sort of what are we learning about how to change it?
No, excellent question. So I'll give you two answers. First, there's the political side, and then there's the side that's a little bit more nuance and creativity. On the political side of things, nothing is ever going to replace like large-scale federal action that can like unlock the potential for more things to happen. In order to do that, you need to create something called a durable majority of people to be able to do that. It's not just a one-off kind of thing. And up until this point, we don't have enough of a durable majority to sustain us for climate action, so it ends up being something that gets decided in fits and starts in different ways. And that's not to say that the activists and the experts, like all of us, have not been doing a good enough job. It's just that there's not enough of us, right? And so there is a need to make sure that on the policy and the political side, that we are recognizing that we are going to have to try something different to reach folks that we are not currently reaching. And what that tells us is that there's got to be better ways to do that. One of the things that we've been investing in a lot is deep audience engagement, audience research, to understand more about where people are actually getting their information, what they're doing. And the truth is, if you are not watching news, you are not getting climate information. Mm-hmm. So you think about that and think about how many people watch news, think about where you consume your content, which is typically on the phone in your pocket. And if you're not watching news, you're not getting climate content. So the question then is like, how are we engaging large swaths of folks that are otherwise under or unengaged around climate action? And so for us, we've spent the last year doing intense work with digital content creators, particularly to understand how these small business workers, small business owners, are really building out curated, thoughtful, intentional engagement with people all across the globe. And they're honoring that engagement with their audiences in a way that we could learn a lot from. You know, in the nature of organic media right now, you don't campaign and target folks. You don't choose them, they choose you. Mm-hmm. So you have to be able to create content that is attractive to people. And what people have to recognize is that our culture, like you said, is not a tangible thing. It's not an artifact. Our culture is a practice. We practice our culture together every day through our habits, through our aspirations, through our behavior. And so giving people, recognizing that, and then being able to tap into how people actually gather what they're passionate about, where there are opportunities to be able to give them reasons to be aspirational, that's part of why this is so interesting and so important, is that we have to be able to turn the corner from targeting folks and then into a place of inviting, mm-hmm. and to also letting people be as authentic as they can be within their own space, but still contribute. There's 61 different behaviors that impact demand-side management in the IPCC report. You can pick one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm gonna come to the audience in a second for questions, and I really do encourage those of you who are online, please put in questions, because I'm gonna basically ask them in order. So if you get in there first, you're gonna get asked, and then if you do it at 5-2, you're not gonna get asked. So one final quick question for everybody on the audience, everybody on the panel, before we go to the audience question, which is, what's the most powerful climate story you've ever heard? Ever. I didn't tell them I was going to ask them this. What's the most powerful climate story you've ever heard? If beings were talking about this.
Ooh, oh wow. I'm gonna pick something a little off the mark, if that's okay. I genuinely feel like the television show Parks and Rec is a climate story to me. It was so fun and engaging, and ultimately I think it is a climate story because it's showing what public service looks like. It's showing what putting incremental changes that are bettering your community in where you live. It's dreaming big. It's going against government institutions to try to make micro changes, and how frustrating that can be. So I think in so many ways it really humanized what policy change looks like on a micro scale, and I think it's just something we haven't really seen a lot, and I really appreciate that show because although it doesn't directly engage climate, I think what it does is it engages climate values that we need, and that is really the potential, is not shoving climate change down people's throats or audiences' throats, but showing them a different value system of what we could be together as we navigate this crisis, which on a core level is a human problem that we need human, micro, and nuanced solutions to.
Love it. Powerballs, powerballs, powerballs. Adam.
Yeah, I'll also choose a little bit of an unexpected answer maybe, and I would say Black Panther. You know, I think one of the many issues we face is that people do not see a way out of this crisis. There's no hopeful vision of the future. You know, you go back to the 1960s and you had the Jetsons and Star Trek and these hopeful visions of where our society would arrive, where we've tackled the pressing issues of our day. And it is a genre that is almost completely non-existent right now. To the extent that we see film and TV in the future, it's often very apocalyptic. And Wakanda is the one example you can point to in recent film and TV that is a hopeful, aspirational vision for our future. And so I choose that because I think that's more than anything really what we need. You know, you're dealing with a crisis of teenagers being climate fatalists. They don't believe there's hope for the future. We as storytellers, our industry needs to envision that world, to show people that there's a way out of this. So.
Love it so much. Wow, this is like you guys have got a big ask, Emma.
Can I put in a plug for gaming? Because there's nothing quite like building a world from scratch in a game to help you see what's possible. So for a shameless plug, we now have 3 games that are in our nascent gaming business are all about that subject, whether with a biodiversity angle, with Flutter, rebuilding a degraded landscape with Terra Nil, and then the Monument Valley series, which has been wildly popular. And stay tuned for the next one because it's even more centered around sustainability. So I'm not a gamer, but I might need to become one because it allows you to really imagine that future. For me, how many people have seen My Octopus Teacher? How many people have heard someone say, I'm never eating octopus again after, yes. So that film was very intentionally not about climate, it wasn't about emissions, it wasn't about clean tech or engineered solutions. It was about the hidden, invisible climate solution that has been stabilizing the climate since before humans showed up, nature. And that human to octopus love affair, because that's really what it was, creates deep empathy in the audience. And they intentionally did not show the encroachment of commercial fisheries on that octopus's habitat. But in part because they made that difficult decision, that film has created real policy change on the ground. It's shut down octopus farms in countries thousands of miles away. It's created no-take zones around South Africa. It's helped turn those kelp forests into World Heritage sites. I mean, the filmmakers would be blushing if they heard this, but it really is incredible, the power of that one human to octopus connection. So that would be mine.
Right, we need a new criteria at the Oscars, that you don't get an Oscar unless you have basically had that kind of real world impact, Just like, on that note, so My Octopus Teacher won an Oscar, and then Elephant Whisperer, who some of you might have seen, just won the Oscar for short films. Very similar kind of story, so there's something there to be mined. Yeah, brilliant, love it. Mark, your favorite story?
Gosh, so one of the things that we find is that narrative shift is an important part of all of this. And so, as you mentioned, this dominant narrative of doom is particularly overpowering. And so for me, I always think about the idea that if you're going to move from doom to a sense of possibility, you're going to move to a future that is something that you can be excited about. The questions I always ask is like, what does that future look like? What does it look like and feel like? And then who is that future for, right? And so for me, and this is also, don't let the luxurious beard fool you. I'm very old, so I'm a big sci-fi person, and so I've always been moved by Star Trek, right? next generation, all the things, old ones, new ones. And the reason is that they always paint a picture of the future that acknowledges that they've already moved past these particular challenges. Right? So it acknowledged that there was issues, there was overdependence on fossil fuels, there was strife, both political as well as military. And in order for us to take part in that future that we're promised, you have to move past that. And that for me has always been something that, and they also had black people in that future, which is also important to me too, because that was also a unique thing for Star Trek. So that's been one thing that's guiding me, that you have to be able to visually see that there's a future that you're moving towards and that you're a part of it.
Love it. The Enterprise does not run on petrol. Love it. So I will answer myself, and I'm going to be a bit facetious. My favourite story is Frozen, because as a climate parable, you've got a despotic monarch who is an environmental disaster and destroys her local community, and it's only love that can save the day. So my nieces hate when I'm horrible about Elsa, but anyway. We're now going to come to, yeah, we should open it, let it go. That's how we're going to close this panel out. We're going to close this panel out with that. So I'm going to come to, and let's see how, we've got about 20 minutes. Let's see how quickly we can go. So question from audience, then question online, question audience, question online. Who wants to go first? And do we have any mics roving around?
Thank you so much. This is so interesting. I'm Lynn Schenk. I'm the director of the Business and Environment Initiative at Harvard Business School. And I have a question about your point, Emma, about Outer Banks, which is a show my teenage girls love. But I'm wondering how you transition from having the star talk about the relevance of climate change to actually incorporating the realities of climate change in the show itself, not having an episode about climate, but really, given that it's so much of the context of the location of the show, how are you thinking about having it just be a realistic part of the context of the show itself?
If I can put you on the spot, have you watched it with your teenagers?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it is sprinkled throughout. One of the main characters is constantly referring to things like, she has great lines, like 1% for the planet? How about 100% for the planet? And she's regularly challenging her peers, often in slightly annoying ways, which was a choice by the filmmakers, to think about their impact. But I think it's a fair question for the filmmakers as to whether the impacts of climate change are showing up in the storytelling. What does come through, though, is that it's deeply felt by one of the leading characters, and she is doing her best to shape norms within her peer group.
So, I mean, the question is also, do you get outside assistance, or how is that knowledge incorporated in the writing of it itself? Or is it from the passion?
Filmmakers did that themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a great question from Lisa Howe at BAFTA, at the Albert. So you don't know Albert. Albert is the part of BAFTA, the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, that is focused on sustainability. And we did a fantastic project with them called Planet Placement. And Lisa has in many ways called out something which I deliberately didn't put on the panel, which is sustainable production. So we're talking a lot about storytelling. And one of the reasons why we're talking a lot about storytelling, it's my panel, and I wanted to talk about storytelling, because over the week of Solutions House, we have got a lot of industries sitting up here who have huge footprints. We have got agriculture sitting up here. We have got retail sitting up here. We have got cement sitting up here. We have got banks sitting up here, all of whom have monumental, massive footprints. And that's their material impact. My personal opinion is that you guys have got to put your house in order, but a lot of those answers were already there. But your material impact as an industry is the stories that you tell. And that you will be remembered for the stories that you tell, not whether you recycled your coffee cups. That's a bit facetious, but anyway. But I'm actually going to come to Heather with this, which is at the Hollywood Climate Summit, you do both. You cover both production and storytelling. So do you want to break my rule about this panel and actually talk about production a bit?
Well, I think it's really been exciting to see how connected the conversation is, because if you can develop the creative world to also showcase a sustainable world, then we are really connecting the dots from the creative impetus of even making choices that make your production more sustainable, like less locations, what locations are you using, what does the world building and the world design look like? How can that influence what we're seeing on screen? How are we shifting from a materialistic perspective of culture to one that could be regenerative? So if you're thinking that way in the world building stage, that's a really wonderful precedent to then bring that to your set and your production for how you're doing that. And then we also heard from the amazing co-directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once this year, and they've really been talking about also bringing a decolonizing mindset to production practices. So sustainability in terms of human resources. So what does our workday look like? How are we making the intersection between labor and sustainability? How are we talking differently about an intersectional lens of racial justice, of disability? And that's what we really crack open at the Hollywood Climate Summit. And I think when you do that, you start to see that sustainable production is not just about removing plastic water bottles from a set, it's about making it more accessible. It's about envisioning a world and thinking about the DEI and equity practices of your production. So I think it's a holistic view, and that's how we want to level up the whole conversation.
Climate justice, baby. Woo! Okay, we will go to the room.
Hi.
I'm entertaining Alison. So please go ahead.
Hi, Michelle Waring from Toms of Maine, formerly NRDC. So hi, Emma. Hi, Adam. We used to work together. So I want to ask all of you, how do you think about success in your work, and how do you measure it? Is it seeing more content or getting people to take action?
Brilliant. I'm actually going to start with Mark with this because you guys have been doing some thought about that.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the products we've put out over the last several months is something called Delicious Nuggets. You should just definitely check it out. And
one word of caution: do not Google the words "delicious nuggets." Just saying, been there, travesty.
It's a fun journey. It's a fun journey. And what it is it's a digital product for digital creators, right? It is a product that is designed for digital creators to not only highlight good work, but also give rules of the road to make sure that we are empowering digital creators with not only the scientific rigor, but also the creative inspo to be able to move into a space that has a little bit more engagement around climate positive aspects. And so for us, we think this is a really critical path, right? Because if we are going to broaden the horizon of who's involved in this, you actually have to create something that is actually usable by the people who need to do this. And part of that is not just being prescriptive and saying, you should come be like us. It's like, here are your peers, here are folks that are doing really interesting work. We'll create communion among them, and let's also give you tools to let you play safely in this space. One of the biggest challenges for folks that are engaging in this is the inability for them to feel safe creating content that relates to climate, because it doesn't get the clicks. And so if we're talking about metrics, it can't just be in the beginning when you're emergent, identifying whether or not this is going to be something that's going to drive up the likes. So we have to ultimately de-risk that work for them so that they can start creating model content that becomes something that is particularly powerful for others to see. So we've been doing that by supporting content creators. We've been doing co-productions with content creators. Sam from our office in the back, who's amazing at doing that. And so it's something where you have to experiment, and part of the world that we're in right now is one where those of us that can need to take the risk to be able to make it a safe space for others to be able to play.
Yeah, 100% agree. Emma, I'm going to come to you, but first of all, I'm going to admit that I was involved in a project which was a bad idea, which is we worked to count the number of times climate was mentioned in broadcast media. It was in the UK, and it was done with BAFTA, and we used subtitles to count it, and there's lots of headlines about the fact that cats and cake are mentioned more than climate change, and the Queen is mentioned more than climate change. So yes, it's England. And I actually really regret that, because it put forward the fact that the relevant fact, the relevant message, the relevant measure is how often those words are counted. So I'm just going to put that out there and say, inside Netflix, do you have any other, or is that the wrong way to go about it in terms of trying to put a metric around this?
I would agree with you. that a keyword scrape is not a real way to get a deep understanding of the arts. Maybe if you're an advertiser looking to how many likes you'd get on whatever Twitter's called now, that makes sense. But for the arts, it's all so nuanced. If you take something like Ginny and Georgia, right? There are climate and solutions references throughout that show, but none of them ever say climate. I doubt they even say energy. Some of them are unspoken, right? Like the pest inspector or control guy shows up and it says eco-pest, right? Never mentioned. She's at one point screwing in an LED light bulb as she chats over a glass of wine. Never mentioned. So it's just going to make you really blind. And I would say that if this community told the creative community, you need more mentions of climate change in your script, that's a non-starter. That's not how the process works. So the way that we think about it is, are we pleasing audiences and are we providing enough variety and also quality to serve the very diverse demographics we have across 195 countries and 230 million households, even within the same household. Like my Netflix queue and my husband's Netflix queue is like a bipolar. I mean, we honestly, we look at such different things. So what we do internally is try and understand the consumer and whether they are enjoying our titles, first and foremost. And then secondly, serve the creative community as they come to us with these resources that I described at the top. And then we spotlight those titles as they hit the service. So as of now, we already have over 200 such titles. And the viewership of that is really good. We did a little audit last year and we found that 70% of the membership watches them. That is 170 million households. So they are being absorbed, they are being appreciated, and that for us is success.
Brilliant, thank you. Counting mentions of climate change is not a good idea, but using the hashtag SolutionsHouse2023 is a good idea, and we will be counting. So please, 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 spread the word. We've had a question, Adam, about being torn and where the money comes from. So if you're a celebrity being asked for endorsements, there's a lot of folks out there at the moment who will sign a check if they're a fossil fuel company, or if they're a big plastics company, if they're somebody who produces a lot of waste. How do celebrities and talent, like, how are they finding navigating that? Are they navigating it at all in terms of making decisions about who they endorse, where they'll put their face in association with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and you know, this is obviously a personal decision on a case-by-case basis, but I would say in my years working with talent, I've seen a very noticeable trend where people do care more and more about this. And I could list dozens of deals that didn't end up going through because talent didn't feel comfortable with the answers that they were given when they started asking the important questions. So it is something I view as part of my role at the agency to be on the lookout for that. And of course, you know, there's not necessarily a perfect track record there. It's a personal decision. People are motivated by lots of things. But of course, we want to find opportunities and bring opportunities to talent where it's a win-win. You know, it's a sustainably produced product that also maybe brings them a little income. So I think so much of the work we do is trying to find those carrots. Like, how can we draw people to the right solutions, the right answers?
Brilliant, thank you. So checklist for celebrities to ask corporates. Question from the room. Dude, it's your choice. you got the mic. We'll see who you like.
Hi. I find, Mark and Adam, your comments about a hopeful future really compelling, and I guess, Emma and Heather, I'm curious why we're not seeing that enough right now. Like, why are we not seeing that vision of a future that is joyful, exciting, playful, and what do we need to do to make that happen?
Yeah. Any thoughts, like, basically a dystopia is sexier than utopias? Like, you know.
You know, I really do think it's about bringing people to understand what a hopeful future can look like beyond perhaps what we're seeing, electric cars, wind energy transition, I think it's really about these values and cultural shifts, and what does that look like? And that is what's compelling in character work and in plot development, and so much of what we're seeing in terms of sustainable development goals. I know there's this new pathway of inner development goals, of you can have all the sustainability goals in the world, but unless you have the complexity awareness, the ability to navigate conversations with people that you disagree with, the very human elements of moving towards goals together, that's where I think storytelling can really thrive. So I would say in terms of optimism and hope, I think a big part of that is also how are we interacting with one another? What does our society look like where we are less polarized on this and more collective thinking? What does community look like for us in the future? I think these are the areas where we can really, really lean into, as opposed to maybe what we're being given as kind of the marketing first values of how to solve this issue, and where can we get into the human and intricate values. And I think that's where we can find hope. And that's where we can see a different way of imagining of being with one another. So I would say let's start there and shift away from thinking about showing commercial and marketing solutions first, but thinking about our different way of communicating with one another.
Love that. Inner utopias, not just the outer ones.
Yes, yeah.
I think I would say, the world that creatives write often just reflects what the zeitgeist is. And as we've noted, part of the problem right now is we're in this, crisis of hopelessness. And when you're seeing headlines like we see every single day with climate catastrophe, I think that's just what is in people's minds, and people write about what they know. So we need to find ways to inspire the creative class to write these stories. I go to these sustainability conferences, and you walk around hearing about these amazing people developing these technologies that are going to save the world, and you don't hear about that. There's a story in the New York Times today about what I think it's Singapore, and how they're using this architecture to deal with the growing heat. And I was like, oh wow, this is the type of story we need. We're using our technology to solve these problems, and obviously that creates a whole bunch of new stories to tell. It's a fertile, creative environment. We just need to bring the creative class to that world so that they can start telling these stories.
Yeah, we need to expose them to it and have forums where they can see it in a story world as well. So bringing these to them in their own professional language of how this is going to apply to their story worlds that they're building.
If I can just build on that, it doesn't have to be centered around that futuristic, hopeful scenario, right? Christiana Figueres, who of course struck the Paris Agreement, talks about how if you can't imagine it, you can't walk towards it. And people are having a crisis of imagination right now. But if you look at something like Down to Earth with Zac Efron, which started out as a travel show and really became a tour de force of sustainability solutions, all of which were homegrown. So he had a wonderful time chatting with all of these local entrepreneurs, indigenous leaders, etc. But that's more in the unscripted genre, right? So maybe you're not in the mood for that. Well, we have something over here with Rob Lowe, which is just a crazy comedy with him and his son, in which it's not centered around this future, but he plays a climate tech entrepreneur who is inventing carbon sequestering concrete, which we mentioned already exists. But that's the sort of thing. Perfect. Okay, so Rob Lowe is going to be, just happens to be embodying the entrepreneur who otherwise is only presenting to the venture community and doesn't make it into the USA Todays of the world. So there's a million ways that you can depict it. It doesn't have to be utopia. And as one of my colleagues likes to say, there can still be affairs in a utopia. There can still be murder in a utopia. I think one of the things that draws the artistic community to dystopia is that the darkness is rich and fertile with creative opportunity. The same can be true in a zero carbon world.
Yeah, and I'll settle. Like, it doesn't have to be utopia. I will settle for normalizing behaviors, right?
Yes.
So I don't want to ever see a scene in which someone has to run back into the house to see if they left the stove on, because that's only exists when we have to deal with a fossil-centric existence. So I'm saying that we have the ability to normalize these behaviors And that part of it allows for the rich character development that happens with that as the background.
Yeah, and I would say in the novel writing community, which I'm a part, there's a new genre, uplit sci-fi, which folks like Becky Chambers are pioneering. And there's a lot of utopia in that, in terms of uplit sci-fi. And I think that sometimes, interestingly, although that sector moves so much more slowly than film and TV do, that sometimes the fashions can move from print and novel. And uplit sci-fi has been superbly popular and sold a buttload of books, which also makes the business case. We've got so many questions coming in online, so I want to ask a couple really quickly. We've got one. You've partly answered this, but let's go to Emma around. Should there be a net zero for storytelling as well as a net zero for footprint?
Like a target?
Yeah.
Again, in the artistic world, in the creative world, targets tend to prescribe a given outcome, which is the antithesis of creativity. So yes, we have public climate targets in terms of decarbonizing our company at speed and at the scale that science prescribes. And as I described earlier, often that work behind the camera then feeds into or actually just spots opportunities with talent or the writers themselves, and it becomes this wonderfully virtuous circle that changes the expectations, it sounds like, when they go to other studios, which I was unaware of. But in terms of prescribing something for a given studio, I'm not sure you want targets or governments telling the entertainment sector what to create. I don't know that that's in anyone's interest, just like we don't want to be told what technology is the best to use to decarbonize a production. We know at this point really well, and we know in some cases how to get it. Yalmaz is here from Disney, and we recently announced a coordinated project, yes, Disney and Netflix, teaming together to rapidly scale alternatives to those pesky diesel generators that are omnipresent in our industry and don't have immediate drop-in substitutes. Those are things where measurement and targets make a lot of sense. They're very conducive to that. The creative world, not so much.
Got it. I'm going to ask a quick question of each of you, then I'm going to come to another question here. Mark, we've got a creator on here who says, how can I speak to scientists and try to understand what's going on? What would you say to any creator who wants to really understand the science of this?
Yeah, so I think that science generally has and the scientific community has done an amazing job of giving us all of the information, not an amazing job of demystifying that for most people to be able to understand. That's part of why we've done the work that we've done. I would say that one of the ways in which creators can start to be able to grow a compendium of information around being able to communicate effectively is to create and join networks that support creators. I think that what we've also found is that the world of content creation can be isolating sometimes. And so being able to share the fact that the same way in which you share creation and you share ideas with the others through the content you develop, there is value in growing a network and an alliance of and a collective. Because I think that what we're also witnessing in a lot of different ways is that collective action has not gone away as being a very powerful tool to be able to either get help or to provide balance to systems that are out of balance. So I would say reach out. We'd love to have that conversation with you, but then also on top of that, I would say look to create community, because that collective is going to be particularly important.
Brilliant. Very quickly, I'm going to ask you this question because you're the person who represents talent. How do you break into corporate sustainability in the entertainment industry? I want a job doing this.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a growing field, and this is not the first time I've heard this question recently. Actually, a good friend of mine took me to lunch the other day. I had no idea what was coming. I thought it was going to be a personal issue or something. He's like, how do I do climate and entertainment? There's a lot of great opportunities, and I think one of the most important things is recognizing, and I think this is again true across the board in many areas, is how do we enter an industry through normal channels with the idea that we're incorporating climate and sustainability in whatever it is we're doing? That's the most important part here, that every single job has a way to incorporate this into the work they're already doing. If you're a creative, you're writing it into the story. If you're working on the set, it's around sustainable production. If you're talent, you're using your platform and influence. So, entertainment's a notoriously difficult industry to break into, but it obviously can be done. And when you get there, you bring this energy with you. And I think that's how change gets made.
Love it. It's 2023. Every job is a climate job. Heather, big question about, we talked a lot about climate change on here. We've talked somewhat about climate justice. We haven't talked about nature. Any plans for it to be the Climate and Nature Hollywood Climate Summit? They're made to get more around like the massive biodiversity crisis we're facing, as well as the climate crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what we have to do every year is come to the table and look at this from multiple angles. I mean, that is the exposure that we are talking about for the creative community, to really have different on-ramps to understanding this. So absolutely, a big part of that is talking about biodiversity. When we're talking about cultural shifts, that also includes our relationship with nature, how we've become so disconnected from it. So I think there's no topic that's off the table, and I think it's really important that we're continued to be inspired by how many different solutions there are, how many different ways into this issue there are, and really breaking open what our concept of an environmental climate story is, and seeing it in every creative way possible. And so how can nature inform the next great blockbuster? How can it inform a television show that we love, or a character that we love? So all of which is to say, bring us your ideas. We want to program them, and we want the creative community to embrace them.
Oh, what a brilliant Now, I got so wrapped up in this, I forgot what the time was. And we are going to have to wrap, I'm afraid, because we've got some folks who need to shoot off. The fact that this has been such an oversubscribed session, the fact that we've got folks, thank you so much, those of you who've kept your feet for an hour, we salute you. The fact that there's been hundreds of questions coming, and I'm sure there's hundreds of questions. This will not be the last time we have this conversation. In fact, we're having this conversation in about half an hour. So if you're staying for the session in half an hour, please feel free to stay inside Solutions House. If you're not, please do make space, because the next session is also oversubscribed, and please let the people who signed up for it to come in. Folks, please stay in contact. It's been such a pleasure to have you in here. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.